He was the man who had promised her forever Julian Vance, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with success. She was the woman who had stood by him from the very beginning. Amelia Hayes, the quiet architect of his world, and the woman now carrying his child. But promises like glass can be shattered. In one cruel, rain-soaked moment, he chose a whisper of temptation over a lifetime of loyalty. While his pregnant wife stood shivering on the curb, his mistress Isabel Rossi simply watched from the doorway and laughed. A laugh that echoed with victory. But they forgot one simple universal law: what goes around comes around. And karma. Karma always saves its most spectacular performance for the grandest stage. The Vance penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a statement. It was a testament to Julian Vance's meteoric rise in the world of financial technology. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, a city Julian felt he had conquered. Every piece of furniture, every sculpture, every brushed steel appliance was chosen with clinical precision. It was a beautiful, sterile masterpiece. And in the heart of it lived Amelia Hayes, the woman who remembered when their entire world was a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Queens, filled with takeout boxes and dreams. She was the one who had proofread his business plans, made coffee at 3 a.m., and celebrated his first ever $1,000 profit with a cheap bottle of champagne. Now they drank vintages that cost more than their first car, but the fizz was gone. Amelia, 6 months pregnant, ran a hand over her swelling belly. The baby, a girl they had decided to name Lily, was a restless little thing. Amelia felt a surge of love so fierce it was almost painful. This baby was the anchor she was clinging to in the increasingly turbulent sea of her marriage. Julian had changed. The ambitious, warm-hearted man she fell in love with had been slowly eroded, replaced by a polished, ruthless CEO. He was Julian Vance of Vance Innovations, now a name whispered in boardrooms and splashed across the pages of Forbes. He moved differently, spoke differently. His compliments felt like performance reviews, and his affection was rationed like a scarce commodity. The first crack in their gilded cage had a name: Isabel Rossi. Isabel was Vance Innovations' new head of public relations. She was everything Amelia was not. Where Amelia was serene and thoughtful with a love for classic architecture and quiet evenings, Isabel was a supernova of ambition and charisma. She wore sharp designer suits, her heels clicking on the marble floors of Julian's office like a metronome counting down the seconds of Amelia's marriage. Amelia first met her at a company dinner. Isabel had a way of touching Julian's arm when she spoke, a casual intimacy that felt anything but. She'd looked at Amelia's pregnant form with a gaze that was not congratulatory, but rather assessing, like a predator sizing up a wounded animal. "Amelia, how wonderful to finally meet you." Isabel had purred her smile, not quite reaching her cold, calculating eyes. "Julian talks about you. Occasionally." The occasionally was a perfectly sharpened dagger. The signs piled up. Late nights at the office became all-nighters. Business trips extended over weekends. The scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, a classic but not Amelia's, clung to his shirts. When Amelia confronted him, her voice trembling but firm, he deployed the classic weapons of a guilty man: deflection and gaslighting. "You're being hormonal, Amelia. It's the pregnancy," he'd say, not even looking up from his tablet. "Isabel is crucial to the company's Q4 strategy. We're launching a new platform. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under?" He made her feel small, irrational. He was building an empire, and she was worried about perfume. But Amelia was an architect. She understood foundations, and the foundation of their life together was crumbling into dust. The final proof came not as a whisper, but as a digital shout. A friend, a sympathetic secretary from Julian's office, perhaps sent her an anonymous email. Attached was a photo. It was from a society blog taken at a private gallery, opening Amelia had been too tired to attend. It was Julian, his arm wrapped possessively around Isabel's waist. They weren't just standing together. They were intertwined, their bodies, speaking a language of illicit familiarity. Isabel was looking up at him, her lips parted in a triumphant smile. Julian was looking down at her, not with the eyes of a CEO looking at an employee, but with the unguarded adoration he once reserved only for Amelia. Staring at the photo, the sterile perfection of the penthouse seemed to mock her. The city lights blurred through her tears. She felt the baby kick a small, insistent reminder of the life that depended on her. Her heartbreak was no longer just her own. She had to fight not just for her marriage, but for her child's future. That evening, when Julian came home, he found Amelia waiting for him in the living room. The tablet with the photo was on the coffee table. The air was cold and still. "Explain this, Julian," she said, her voice quiet, devoid of hysteria, which seemed to unnerve him more than shouting would have. He looked at the photo, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of shame crossed his face. It was quickly replaced by a mask of hardened resolve. The fight was over before it even began. He had already made his choice. "Amelia." He began, his tone that of a CEO handling a difficult but necessary downsizing. "Things have been complicated for a while now. We've grown apart." "Grown apart," she repeated the words, tasting like ash. "Julian, I am carrying your child, our daughter." "There is no growing apart from that." "The pregnancy complicates things, I admit," he said, and the coldness of his words struck her with the force of a physical blow. "But Isabel, she understands my world. She challenges me. She's aligned with my future." "And I'm not," Amelia whispered, her heart breaking into a million pieces. "The woman who believed in you when you had nothing." He wouldn't meet her eyes. People change, Amelia. That was it. 10 years of love, loyalty, and shared dreams dismissed with 3 words. She knew then that the man she married was gone. In his place stood a stranger in an expensive suit, a hollow man who saw his unborn child as a complication and his wife as a relic of a past he was eager to shed. The battle wasn't to save her marriage. The battle now was to survive its demolition. The rain began that night, a relentless, miserable drizzle that mirrored the weeping of Amelia's soul. She had hoped for a fight, for remorse, for anything other than the chilling finality in Julian's eyes. But there was none. He had already moved on, and she was just a loose end to be tied up. The next few days were a blur of stilted conversations and suffocating silence. Julian moved into one of the guest suites, a stranger in his own home. He communicated with her through short, impersonal texts, mostly about logistics. Lawyers would be in touch. An arrangement would be made. The arrangement came in the form of a manila envelope left on the kitchen island. It contained a divorce settlement proposal. It was generous, clinically so. It offered her a lump sum that would ensure she never had to work again, a trust for the baby, and a list of available high-end apartments. It was a severance package for a decade of her life. Appended to it was a non-disclosure agreement that would gag her from ever speaking about their life or his infidelity. He wasn't just divorcing her. He was trying to erase her. Amelia didn't want the money. She wanted the life they had built, the future they had planned for their daughter. She wanted the man who held her hand in the hospital during the first ultrasound and cried when he heard the tiny, fluttering heartbeat. Where had that man gone? The final brutal act happened a week later. Amelia was packing a small bag of personal items, photographs, a book of poetry he'd given her. Her mother's locket when she heard the front door open. It wasn't Julian. It was Isabel. She stood in the grand foyer as if she owned it, dressed in a blood-red dress that seemed to defy the gloom of the day. She surveyed the apartment with a proprietary air, her eyes finally landing on Amelia. "I thought I'd come and see the progress," Isabel said, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "Julian felt it would be better if you expedited your departure. It's awkward, you understand." Amelia felt a cold fury rise within her, a protective instinct for herself and her unborn child. "This is still my home, Isabel. You have no right to be here." Isabel laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "Oh, darling, don't be so naive. A home is just property. And this property is about to be under new management. I'm thinking of a complete redesign. This whole aesthetic you have. It's so gentle. So last season." Each word was a calculated cruelty. Just then Julian walked in. He stopped short when he saw the two women, a flicker of discomfort on his face. "Isabel, I told you to wait in the car," he said, his voice tight. "I got impatient," she purred, walking over and linking her arm through his. "I wanted to make sure things were moving along. We have dinner reservations at Per Se, and I need time to change." Amelia looked at Julian, pleading with her eyes. "Say something. Defend me. Defend our history." He just looked away, his jaw tight. "Amelia, the lawyers, said you agreed to be out by the end of the week. It's better to just get this over with." "Get this over with?" Amelia's voice finally broke. Tears streamed down her face. "This is our life, Julian. You can't just throw it away for her." She gestured towards Isabel, whose smile only widened. "It's already done," Julian said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The sooner you accept it, the easier it will be." He started to walk towards the door, pulling Isabel with him. Overwhelmed by a tidal wave of grief and desperation, Amelia followed them. She reached out her hand, landing on Julian's arm. "Julian, please, don't do this. Think about Lily. Think about our daughter." It was the wrong thing to say. His face hardened into a mask of pure, cold fury. He turned his body tense. "I told you. It's over." He pulled his arm away from her grasp, but he did it with such force, such dismissive anger, that Amelia, caught off balance, stumbled backward. Her heel caught on the edge of a rug. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, she was airborne, her arms windmilling as she tried to regain her footing. She landed hard against the hallway console table, a sharp pain radiating from her hip. Her hands flew instinctively to her stomach, a gasp of fear escaping her lips. It wasn't a violent shove, but it was a push nonetheless, a physical manifestation of how he was pushing her out of his life. It was careless, it was cruel, it was final. He froze his eyes wide with a flash of what might have been horror. But before he could act, before he could say a word, Isabel stepped in front of him, blocking his view of Amelia on the floor. And then she laughed. It wasn't a giggle. It was a throaty, genuine, triumphant laugh. A laugh that said, "I have won. You have lost. And it is glorious." "Oh my," Isabel said, looking down at Amelia with mock concern. "So clumsy. You really should be more careful in your condition." The sound of that laugh, more than the fall, more than the divorce papers, more than the affair itself, shattered the last vestiges of Amelia's love for Julian. In that moment, she saw him not as the man she had lost, but as the weak, spineless coward he had become, a man who would stand by and let another woman laugh at the mother of his child, crumpled on the floor. Julian just stood there, paralyzed, a puppet whose strings were now held by Isabel. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just let Isabel lead him out the door, away from the wreckage of the life they had built. As the heavy penthouse door clicked shut, the sound of Isabel's laughter still echoing in the hallway, Amelia stayed on the floor, cradling her stomach, the cold marble seeping into her bones. The physical pain in her hip was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. She was alone. Truly, utterly alone. But as she felt a reassuring flutter from within her womb, a tiny spark of steel ignited in her soul. She had been pushed down, but she would not stay down. For Lily, she would rise. The first few weeks were a descent into a grey, featureless hell. Amelia moved into a small, characterless apartment that her friend and lawyer Clara had found for her. The silence was the loudest thing in the room, a constant screaming reminder of all she had lost. She would wake up in the middle of the night, her hand reaching for Julian's side of the bed, only to find it cold and empty. Clara was her rock. A sharp, fiercely loyal litigator, she handled the legalities with a ruthlessness that Amelia couldn't muster. She tore Julian's initial settlement offer to shreds. "This isn't a settlement, it's an insult," Clara had fumed, pacing Amelia's tiny living room. "He thinks he can buy your silence and your dignity with a wire transfer. No. We fight for what's yours, what's Lily's. He doesn't get to detonate your life and walk away with a clean conscience and a good press release." Amelia, numb and exhausted, let Clara handle it. She focused on the only thing that mattered, her baby. She went to every doctor's appointment, alone, her heart aching as she saw other couples holding hands in the waiting room. She painted the nursery in her new apartment, a soft, hopeful yellow. She assembled a crib with her own 2 hands, tears mixing with frustration as she struggled with the instructions. Each small act was a reclamation of her independence, a brick laid in the foundation of a new life. One rainy afternoon, feeling trapped by the 4 walls of her apartment, she dug out her old portfolio. Before Julian's career had exploded, before she had become Mrs. Vance, she was Amelia Hayes, a promising young architect. Her designs were her passion. They were innovative, focusing on sustainable materials and the integration of natural light, creating spaces that felt alive. She had put her career on hold to support Julian's always believing that her turn would come. Flipping through the pages of her old sketches and blueprints, she felt a flicker of the woman she used to be. The ambitious, creative spirit who could lose herself for hours in the elegant geometry of a building. On a whim, she pulled out a sketch pad. Her fingers, at first stiff and uncertain, began to move. She didn't draw a skyscraper or a luxury home. She drew a community center, a place with wide open spaces, a rooftop garden for city kids, walls made of reclaimed wood, and a library flooded with sunlight, a place of hope and renewal. Drawing became her therapy. She filled sketch pads with ideas, pouring all her pain, her hope, her resilience into lines and angles. It was more than a hobby. It was a quiet act of defiance. Julian and Isabel could take her home, but they couldn't take her talent. Clara, seeing the spark return to her friend's eyes, pushed her. "These are brilliant, Amelia. You can't just let them sit in a book. Let's do something." Clara had a contact, a city councilman who was part of a committee overseeing the redevelopment of a derelict lot in a struggling neighborhood. It wasn't a glamorous, high-profile project. The budget was shoestring. But it was a chance. Hesitantly, Amelia agreed to put together a proposal. She worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a burning need to prove mostly to herself that she was more than just Julian Vance's discarded wife. She built a scale model on her small dining table using recycled cardboard and balsa wood. Her final design for the Greenleaf Community Hub was breathtaking. It was practical, beautiful, and deeply human. She presented it to the committee in a drab, windowless room. She was nervous, her voice shaking at first. But as she started to describe the solar panels, the rainwater harvesting system, the way the central atrium was designed to foster interaction, her passion took over. She wasn't selling a building. She was sharing a vision. They were blown away. A small independent firm was chosen for the project, Hayes Design Studio, a name Amelia had registered just days before the presentation. Her first client check was for an amount smaller than Julian's weekly wine budget, but when she held it in her hand, it felt like $1 million. It was hers. She had earned it. While Amelia was quietly laying the first bricks of her new life, Julian and Isabel were cementing their status as Manhattan's new power couple. They were everywhere in gossip columns, at charity galas, on the cover of a society magazine with the headline, "The Vances 2.0, a perfect partnership." The article painted Julian as a visionary, rejuvenated by a new love, and Isabel as the brilliant strategist behind his renewed success. There was no mention of a pregnant ex-wife. She had been successfully erased. One evening, exhausted after a long day of dealing with contractors, Amelia saw them on TV. It was an interview from the red carpet of some tech awards ceremony. Isabel was wearing a glittering silver dress, dripping with diamonds. She leaned into the microphone, her voice smooth as silk. "Julian's genius is that he's always looking forward," she said, squeezing his arm. "He doesn't get bogged down by the past. It's all about innovation, disruption, and building a better future." Julian beamed, preening under her praise. Watching them, Amelia didn't feel the familiar stab of pain. Instead, she felt a strange sort of pity. Their world was built on a lie, a glittering facade of innovation and future that was propped up by cruelty and betrayal. Amelia looked down at her own hands, smudged with graphite, and a bit of dirt from the construction site. She was building something real, something tangible, something that would bring light and hope to a community. Let them have their red carpets and their flashbulbs. She was an architect. She knew that a structure built on a rotten foundation, no matter how beautiful it looks, is destined to collapse. And she was content to wait and to build. Months bled into one another. Amelia's world became a cycle of prenatal appointments, long hours at the Greenleaf construction site, and quiet evenings sketching new designs. Hayes Design Studio, operating out of a small shared workspace, began to get noticed. The Greenleaf project, despite its small budget, was generating positive buzz in architectural circles for its innovative eco-conscious design. A prominent design blog ran a feature on it, calling it a quiet masterpiece of community-focused architecture. The article mentioned Amelia Hayes as a fresh, vital new voice in urban design. Her name was starting to exist on its own, untethered from Julian's. Then Lily was born. Holding her daughter for the first time, Amelia felt a profound sense of peace. All the pain, the betrayal, the loneliness of the past year melted away in the face of this tiny, perfect human. Lily had her mother's calm blue eyes and a stubborn little chin that was all Julian. Looking at her, Amelia's resolve hardened into something unbreakable. Her fight was no longer about her own vindication. It was about building a world of integrity and strength for her daughter. Julian had been legally notified of the birth. He did the bare minimum required by the courts. Child support payments arrived on time, transferred electronically, as impersonal as a utility bill. He sent an ostentatiously large bouquet of flowers to the hospital with a card that read, "Wishing you well," signed with his sterile corporate signature. He made no request to see his daughter. Isabel, it seemed, had won that battle too. Isabel's reign as the new Mrs. Vance was absolute. She had successfully orchestrated a complete rebranding of their lives. The Park Avenue penthouse was gutted and redecorated in a style she called assertive modernism, a cold, imposing collection of black marble chrome and brutalist art. She hosted lavish parties where the guests were not old friends, but rather a curated list of influencers, investors, and media personalities who could amplify the Vance brand. She had also inserted herself into Vance Innovations. Julian, blinded by her flattery and ambition, gave her a seat on the board as Chief Strategy Officer. She had a knack for and marketing, but she lacked a fundamental understanding of the tech world or the company's culture. Old guard employees loyal to the company Julian had built began to grumble. She was all style, no substance, making sweeping decisions based on optics rather than sound business principles. One of her pet projects was the Vance Foundation, a philanthropic arm of the company designed to generate positive press. Their flagship initiative was a multi-million-dollar donation to the city's Museum of Modern Art to sponsor a new wing. It was a flashy, high-profile move that landed them on the cover of Philanthropy Today. Amelia saw the article while waiting in the pediatrician's office with Lily. There was a photo of Julian and Isabel at a press conference handing over a giant check. Isabel was quoted extensively speaking of their deep commitment to the cultural enrichment of the city. Amelia had to smile. She remembered Julian once saying he found modern art pretentious. This was all Isabel. It was philanthropy as a performance. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the Greenleaf Community Hub was nearing completion. The rooftop garden was planted by neighborhood kids. The library was being stocked with donated books. The free clinic in the basement was preparing to open its doors. It was quiet, unglamorous work that wouldn't land anyone on a magazine cover, but it was real. The contrast between their two worlds became starker every day. Isabel's life was a curated feed of glamorous events, a fashion show in Paris, a yachting trip in Monaco, a film festival at Cannes. Amelia's life was a camera roll of unglamorous but beautiful moments. Lily's first smile, the sunlight hitting the reclaimed wood of the hub's atrium, the joyful faces of the children at the center's opening day. Amelia's work began to speak for itself. The success of the Greenleaf Hub led to another commission, then another. A sustainable library for a university. A pro bono design for a women's shelter. Hayes' design studio grew, moving into its own small but light-filled office. Amelia hired 2 young, passionate architects to help her. She was becoming known for a specific style architecture with a conscience. One day, an unexpected visitor appeared at her studio. It was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a legend in the tech world, an early investor in Vance Innovations, and Julian's longtime mentor. He was an old-school gentleman who valued integrity above all else. Amelia had always liked and respected him. He had sent a personal handwritten note and a beautiful silver rattle when Lily was born. He looked around her studio at the sketches and models, a look of genuine admiration on his face. "Amelia," he said, his voice warm, "I've been following your work, the Greenleaf Project. It's magnificent, not just the design, but the heart in it." "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot coming from you." "I'll be frank," he continued, his expression turning serious. "I'm worried about Julian, about the company. This new direction he's taking. It's all gloss, no soul. He's listening to the wrong people." Amelia knew he meant Isabel. She simply nodded, not wanting to speak ill of her ex-husband. "He's forgotten what it's about," Marcus said, more to himself than to her. "He thinks building a legacy is about the share price and getting his name on a museum wing. But a real legacy, it's about building things that last, things that matter." He looked directly at her. "Like what you're doing here." He left a few minutes later, leaving Amelia with a renewed sense of purpose. It was a validation from a world she had left behind, a sign that genuine work done with integrity was still recognized. She didn't know it then, but Marcus Thorne's visit was not just a social call. The wise old Titan had seen the rot in Julian's gilded cage, and he was already thinking about the future. And in his mind, the future of truly innovative, meaningful building belonged not to the Vances, but to Amelia Hayes. A plan was beginning to form in his mind, a plan that would culminate on the city's most glittering stage. While Amelia's star was quietly rising, the shimmer on Julian and Isabel's life was beginning to tarnish. The public saw the power couple the flawless smiles, the endless successes. But behind the closed doors of the assertively modern penthouse, a different reality was taking shape. Isabel, having secured her position, grew more audacious. Her spending was astronomical. She saw the Vance fortune not as something to be nurtured, but as a resource to be consumed. Her rebranding of Julian involved not just his public image, but his private life. She systematically pushed away his old friends, the ones from his pre-billionaire days, replacing them with her own circle of shallow socialites and media sycophants. Julian at first was intoxicated by it all. It was the life he thought he wanted. Glamorous, fast-paced, and admired. Isabel was the ultimate status symbol. But the thrill was fading, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. His conversations with Isabel were never about ideas or dreams. They were about guest lists, press coverage, and brand positioning. She wasn't his partner. She was his publicist. The first major crack appeared at Vance Innovations. Isabel, in her role as Chief Strategy Officer, championed a high-profile acquisition of a flashy but volatile social media startup. She pushed it through the board against the advice of the company's seasoned Chief Financial Officer, who warned that the startup was massively overvalued and hemorrhaging cash. "You're thinking like an accountant," Isabel had argued in the boardroom, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm thinking like a visionary. The synergy is undeniable. The optics are perfect. This will make us relevant to the Gen Z market." Julian, wanting to support her, and perhaps prove to himself that his choice in her was the right one, cast the deciding vote. "Let's be bold," he had declared. 6 months later, the startup imploded. A scandal involving data privacy emerged. The user base collapsed, and Vance Innovations was forced to write off nearly $1 billion. The stock plummeted. It was the first major failure in the company's history. The business journals, once so fawning, were now critical, questioning Julian's judgment and the undue influence of his new wife. The fallout was brutal. The old CFO resigned. Morale at the company hit an all-time low. For the first time, Julian felt the cold grip of real fear. The empire he had built felt fragile. The arguments with Isabel began. They were no longer about trivial things like dinner plans. They were bitter, vicious fights that echoed through the cold marble halls of their penthouse. "This is your fault," Julian yelled one night, waving a copy of the Wall Street Journal with a scathing article about the failed acquisition. "You pushed this. You didn't know what you were talking about." "My fault," Isabel shrieked back, her perfect composure finally cracking. "I'm the one who made you a household name. Before me, you were just another boring tech nerd. I gave you a brand. I gave you a life. You're blaming me because your precious company hit a bump in the road." In that moment, Julian saw her with terrifying clarity. He saw the boundless, selfish ambition, the complete lack of accountability. She didn't care about Vance Innovations, the company he had poured his blood, sweat, and tears into. It was just a vehicle for her. He was just a vehicle for her. He began to think of Amelia. He remembered how she would challenge his ideas not to undermine him, but to make them better. He remembered her quiet wisdom, her genuine concern for the people who worked for them. He remembered her talking about building a company with a good culture, not just a good stock price. The things he had once dismissed as gentle and last season now seemed like pillars of strength and stability. Regret began to creep into his heart, a cold and unwelcome guest. He found himself secretly looking up Hayes Design Studio online. He saw the feature on the Greenleaf Hub. He saw the glowing testimonials from clients. He saw a photo of Amelia at the opening ceremony, holding a baby. His baby. His daughter, Lily. She looked happy, serene, stronger than he had ever seen her. There was a light in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years, a light he now realized he had been the one to extinguish. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and she was doing it without him. A strange, bitter mix of pride and jealousy churned in his gut. One day he ran into Marcus Thorne at a lunch club. "Julian," Marcus said, his tone cool. "Tough quarter. We'll bounce back, Marcus. We always do." "Will you?" Marcus looked at him intently. The market can forgive a financial mistake. It's much harder to forgive a loss of character. You've lost your way, son. Julian bristled. "I don't need a lecture." "No, you probably don't," Marcus said, his voice softening slightly. "You need a mirror. By the way, I saw Amelia the other day. She's doing remarkable things. Truly remarkable. And that little girl of hers, of yours, she's beautiful." The mention of Lily was like a physical blow. Julian walked away from the conversation feeling hollowed out. He went back to a cold, silent penthouse. Isabel was out at a spa retreat with her friends. The brutalist art on the walls seemed to mock him. He had everything he thought he wanted. A trophy wife, a famous name, a life of unimaginable luxury. So why did he feel so utterly, miserably alone? Why did the memory of a small, cramped apartment in Queens, filled with cheap champagne and real laughter, feel more like home than this soulless palace ever had? The gilded cage had become a prison, and he was beginning to realize he was the only one with the key, but had long forgotten where he put it. The Innovator of the Year Gala was the premier event on the city's corporate calendar. It was a night of tuxedos, glittering gowns, and self-congratulation held in the newly renovated Grand Ballroom of the historic Astor Hotel. This year, the gala held special significance for Julian Vance. After the disastrous Q4, he needed a win. His PR team, led by a frantic Isabel, had worked overtime to secure him the keynote speaker slot. It was to be his comeback, a chance to project strength and vision, to put the recent failures behind him. Isabel was a whirlwind of frantic energy. "Everything has to be perfect," she repeated like a mantra. She had bought a custom-made Balenciaga gown, a sheath of shimmering black sequins that was both elegant and menacing. She had a speechwriter craft Julian's address, peppering it with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and forward paradigm thinking. "This is our night, Julian," she said, adjusting his bow tie in the limo. "We will remind them who we are." But her eyes held a flicker of desperation. She knew their social standing was as fragile as Vance Innovations' stock price. They arrived to a frenzy of flashbulbs. Julian put on his public smile, Isabel on his arm, the perfect image of a power couple. They swept into the ballroom, a grand cathedral-like space, and took their seats at the head table right next to the evening's host and main benefactor, Marcus Thorne. "Julian, Isabel." Marcus greeted them, his smile polite, but his eyes cool. "So glad you could make it." Across the vast ballroom, Amelia Hayes was feeling a quiet sense of disbelief. She was there not as a +1, but as a nominee. Hayes' design studio was a finalist for the new Social Impact in Design Award for her work on the Greenleaf Community Hub. She had almost declined the invitation, as galas were not her world. But Clara had insisted. "You earned this, Amelia. You deserve to be in that room, celebrated for your own achievements." Amelia wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress that she'd bought off the rack. It was tasteful and professional. Her only jewelry was her mother's locket. She felt a little like an imposter among the couture gowns and glittering diamonds. But as she looked around the magnificent ballroom, a different feeling took over pride. She looked up at the soaring, intricately restored ceiling, the stunning modern chandeliers that seemed to float like constellations, the way the new acoustic panels were seamlessly integrated into the century-old moldings. She knew this room. She knew every detail of its restoration, because she was the one who had designed it. The Astor Hotel renovation had been her first major high-profile project after the Greenleaf Hub. The hotel's ownership group had been looking for a designer who could respect the building's history while modernizing its functionality. They had been impressed by her portfolio and her philosophy. It had been a challenging, all-consuming job, and she had poured her heart into it. But it was a closely guarded secret who the architect was. The hotel planned a major press reveal the following week. Tonight, no one knew that the very space they were celebrating in was a testament to her talent. The evening wore on. Awards were given out. Speeches were made. Amelia clapped politely, her heart thumping in her chest. Then Marcus Thorne took the stage. "Good evening," he began, his voice commanding silence. "We are here tonight to celebrate innovation. We often think of innovation in terms of technology, of apps and algorithms. But true innovation is about finding new ways to improve human lives. It's about building communities. It's about creating spaces that inspire, heal, and connect us." Julian and Isabel watched from the head table, a polite smile fixed on Isabel's face. She assumed this was the preamble to introducing Julian for his keynote. "Before our keynote address," Marcus continued, "we have one final award to present, the inaugural Marcus Thorne Foundation Award for Architectural Excellence." This was a surprise. It wasn't on the program. A murmur went through the crowd. "This year's recipient is responsible for one of the most breathtaking and thoughtful renovations this city has seen in decades," Marcus boomed. "They took a tired, aging landmark and didn't just restore it. They reimagined it. They honored its past while building its future. Of course, talking about the magnificent ballroom we are all enjoying tonight." The crowd erupted in applause, people craning their necks, looking around the room with new appreciation. On the head table, Julian looked intrigued. Isabel looked bored, tapping her fingers impatiently. This restoration was led by a visionary architect whose work is defined by integrity, sustainability, and a deep, profound humanity. Marcus said, his eyes scanning the room until they found their target. "It is my incredible honor to present this award to the founder of Hayes Design Studio, Ms. Amelia Hayes." The spotlight swung across the room and landed on Amelia's table. A camera feed projected her shocked, beautiful face onto the giant screens on either side of the stage. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, followed by a wave of thunderous applause. At the head table, Julian's face went white. He looked from Amelia's face on the screen to the soaring ceiling above the pieces, clicking into place in his mind with sickening force. He was sitting in a monument to the talent of the wife he had thrown away. But the true shock was on Isabel's face. Her painted smile dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her eyes darted from Amelia to Julian, and back again, a silent, panicked scream in her gaze. This was her night, their comeback, and it was being hijacked by the ghost she thought they had successfully exorcised. Amelia, her legs feeling like jelly, made her way to the stage, the applause washing over her. She shook Marcus's hand and accepted the heavy, elegant award. She stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, her eyes briefly meeting Julian's. She saw in them a universe of shock and regret. She felt nothing. She gave a short, graceful speech, thanking her team and the hotel group. She spoke of the importance of building spaces that serve people. She ended with a simple, powerful statement. "I want to dedicate this award to my daughter Lily," she said, her voice clear and strong, "to remind her that you can build a beautiful future no matter what happens to your past." The applause was deafening, but karma was not done yet. As Amelia walked off stage, Marcus Thorne held up a hand for silence. He wasn't finished. The real performance was just beginning. Marcus Thorne let the applause for Amelia die down, a masterful conductor controlling the rhythm of the room. He beamed at Amelia as she returned to her seat, a beacon of quiet dignity amidst the glamour. Then he turned his attention back to the audience, his expression shifting from celebratory to deeply serious. Julian and Isabel remained frozen at the head table, the smiles wiped clean from their faces, replaced by rigid masks of apprehension. "Amelia's work tonight is a perfect example of what I want to talk about," Marcus began, his voice resonating with authority. "Building a legacy. For years I have focused on building businesses, but as I get older, I find myself wanting to build something more. Something that will outlast all of us." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "That is why tonight I am officially announcing the flagship project of the Marcus Thorne Foundation. We are breaking ground next year on a project I have dreamed of for a long time, a state-of-the-art $100 million pediatric care wing for City General Hospital, the Thorne Family Center for Children's Health." A wave of respectful murmurs and applause swept through the ballroom. This was a monumental philanthropic gesture, the kind that changes a city. Isabel's eyes, however, narrowed. She saw this for what it was, a blatant power play, an announcement that completely overshadowed Julian's upcoming keynote. It was a public snub. "A project of this magnitude," Marcus continued, his voice swelling with passion, "requires more than just money. It requires a visionary. It requires an architect who understands that a hospital for sick children should not feel like a prison, but a place of hope. It needs to be designed with light, with compassion, with love. It requires an architect of not just immense talent, but of unimpeachable character. Julian felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine. He knew, with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty, what was coming next. He wanted to stand up, to leave, to disappear, but he was pinned to his chair by the weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes. Marcus's gaze once again swept the room and landed with deliberate theatrical precision on Amelia. After a 6-month nationwide search, my foundation's board has made a unanimous decision. I could not be prouder to announce that the lead architect for this career-defining legacy project will be Ms. Amelia Hayes and the Hayes Design Studio. If the first announcement had been a shockwave, this was an earthquake. The room erupted. It was a stunning, unprecedented move, handing a project of this scale not to some massive established corporate firm, but to a small rising studio. It was a powerful endorsement, a king-making moment played out on the most public of stages. The cameras once again found Amelia, her face a picture of stunned, tearful disbelief. They then cruelly panned to the head table. The whole room could see it on the giant screens, Julian Vance, pale as a ghost, staring into the abyss of his own making. And beside him, Isabel, her face a grotesque contortion of fury and humiliation. Her carefully constructed world, her perfect evening, her entire identity as the victorious new Mrs. Vance was being publicly dismantled piece by piece. Marcus wasn't finished. He delivered the final devastating blow, not with a shout, but with a quiet, pointed statement. "We chose Amelia Hayes," he said, his voice now low and intimate, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Because she reminds us that true innovation, the kind we are here to celebrate, isn't about disruption for disruption's sake. It's about construction. It's about building things that matter. It's about integrity. It's a quality that sadly seems to be in increasingly short supply these days." Every person in that room understood the subtext. It was a direct public repudiation of Julian Vance's recent history, both corporate and personal. Marcus Thorne, his mentor, his kingmaker, had just publicly stripped him of his crown and handed it to the wife he had so cruelly discarded. The humiliation was absolute, a nuclear winter of social death. Isabel couldn't take it. In a move of sheer, unadulterated panic, she stood up abruptly, knocking over her water glass. She shot Julian a look of pure venom, a look that said, "You did this. You are worthless to me now." And then she turned and fled. Practically running from the head table, her black sequin dress trailing behind her like a river of spilled oil. The cameras followed her ignominious exit. The room was left in a stunned electric silence. Julian sat alone at the center of it all, the spotlight of his failure shining down on him. His keynote speech, the one about forward paradigm thinking, lay forgotten on the table. The future had just been announced, and it had nothing to do with him. He finally looked across the room at Amelia. She was surrounded by well-wishers, people congratulating her, shaking her hand. She was radiant. She was the center of this new, brighter universe. She met his gaze one last time. There was no triumph in her eyes, no malice, no "I told you so." There was only a quiet, sad finality. A door closing. Then she turned away, back to her friends, back to her future. Julian Vance, the titan of industry, the innovator of the year, slowly stood up. He walked off the stage, not to the sound of applause, but to a symphony of whispers. He had pushed Amelia out of his life, and Isabel had laughed. Now the entire world had watched him fall and had given Amelia a standing ovation as she rose. Karma had not just hit, it had orchestrated a masterpiece. In the end, Julian Vance lost everything that truly mattered. Isabel left him that very night, her investment in him having yielded nothing but public shame. His company faltered, his reputation shattered. He was left alone in a cold, empty penthouse, a monument to his own bad choices. But this story isn't about his fall. It's about Amelia's rise. She never sought revenge. She simply chose to build. She built a new life, a thriving business, and with the Thorne Family Center, she would build a legacy of hope for countless children. She stands today, not as a victim of a bitter past, but as the proud architect of her own triumphant future with her daughter Lily by her side. Amelia's journey is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength is not found in tearing others down, but in building ourselves up brick by brick. True success isn't measured in dollars or headlines, but in integrity, resilience, and the positive impact we leave on the world. If Amelia's story of strength and perseverance moved you, please show your support by giving this video a like and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true life stories that inspire. And we want to hear from you. What part of Amelia's comeback resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.